Blood dripped onto the snow, red as the Nordic sunset. Freya Haraldsdóttir, the feared Shieldmaiden, held her bloodied blade as she looked down at the man she had loved in secret for 2 harsh winters. The poem he had recited in the great hall still echoed in her ears, words revealing what should have remained in the shadows. Now, as the camp burned and distant cries filled the air, she knew everything was lost. Thank you for joining this story. This channel is just beginning its journey, and every subscription truly means the world. It helps keep this project alive as we aim for our first 1,000 followers. If you enjoy what you hear, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Let us know where you're watching from. It helps build this community together. Your support is deeply appreciated. The cold crept beneath the thick wooden walls of the cabin long before dawn, wrapping the small room in a silent, chilling embrace. Outside, the frozen breath of winter whispered through the pines, their dark silhouettes standing guard over the sleeping village. A thin layer of frost clung to the window pane, blotting the outside world into a pale blur. A landscape stitched with snow and shadow, still and waiting beneath a heavy sky. Within the modest quarters, Freya Haraldsdóttir stirred, her breath steady and even as her eyes flickered open to the dim pre-dawn light. At 25 winters, she was no stranger to waking early, especially when the cold gripped the land like a relentless beast. Her lean frame shifted beneath the worn furs covering her, muscles already taut with the memory of battles fought and trials endured. She lay still for a moment, gathering herself in the half-darkness, sensing the faint crackling of embers still warm in the hearth's ashes. The cabin was small and sparsely furnished, a rough-hewn wooden table, a single stool, a rack for weapons near the door. The scent of smoke mingled with dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a faint reminder of healing and protection. Though simple, this was her sanctuary, a fragile bubble of quiet in a world forever poised on the edge of violence. Slowly she pushed the furs aside, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor with practiced ease. A sharp breath escaped her lips as the chill bit into her skin, but she welcomed it. The cold was a companion she had come to respect, a constant reminder of the stakes that shaped her life. Her hands, calloused and strong, moved instinctively to the scar that ran across her left cheek, a jagged mark etched deep into her flesh. The sting of the scar was more than physical. It was a story of survival, a testament to the battles she had fought to claim her place among the warriors. To others it might have been a flaw, but to Freya it was a badge of honor, a reminder of the price paid for respect in a world ruled by steel and blood. She rose, the leather of her armor creaking softly as she donned it piece by piece. The supple hide hugged her lithe form, reinforced with strips of iron over the chest and shoulders. Underneath, a tunic of dark blue linen clung to her skin, the color of the deep fjords at twilight. Her dark blonde hair, thick and unruly, was braided tightly back, a practical choice born of necessity in the heat of battle. A silver bracelet, etched with ancient runes for protection, circled her right wrist, a silent talisman against the uncertain fates ahead. Outside, the village of Ravenshield was beginning to stir. The first hints of light teased the horizon, pale and faint beneath heavy clouds that promised another day of biting cold. Smoke curled from chimneys, blending with the icy air and carrying the scent of burning pine and damp earth. The smell was familiar, grounding. It was life in the northern wilds, harsh but resilient. Freya stepped out into the crisp morning, boots crunching over frost-hardened earth. Her breath came in steady puffs, visible in the cold air. The village lay nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, a cluster of wooden cabins and longhouses surrounded by a sturdy palisade of sharpened logs. The walls, bleached gray by years of weather and war, stood as silent sentinels against the world beyond. Children's laughter and shouts echoed faintly, carried on the wind from the village square, where the young ones chased each other, their cheeks flushed with cold and joy. Women stirred fires beneath iron pots, preparing food and weaving cloth, their voices low but purposeful. Men sharpened blades, repaired tools, and inspected weapons, their faces etched with focus and concern. The rhythm of daily life was steady, but underscored by tension, a quiet awareness of the ever-present threats beyond the borders. The clashing of rival clans, the unforgiving wilderness, and the harshness of winter all wove together to shape the fragile balance of their existence. Freya's gaze swept over the scene as she made her way toward the training grounds, a clearing edged with ancient oaks and pines, their gnarled trunks standing like timeless guardians. The ground was hard and cracked from the frost, yet worn smooth in places where many feet had tread in countless drills and contests. Here warriors honed their skills with sword and shield, axe and spear, a ritual of discipline and survival. The clang of metal against wood rang out, blades met shields, grunts of effort and encouragement mingled with the sharp commands of instructors. This was where strength and skill were forged, where a warrior's mettle was tested before the chaos of battle claimed them. Freya moved with the grace of a predator, each step measured and purposeful. She carried the weight of her armor as though it were part of her own flesh, her posture proud but alert. Her piercing ice-blue eyes scanned the field, taking in every movement, every flaw, every opportunity. Her closest companion in this unforgiving world was Astrid Ragnardóttir, the fiery-haired Shieldmaiden with a mischievous smile and a fierce loyalty. Astrid's striking green eyes rested on Freya as she approached, a flicker of concern beneath her usual teasing demeanor. "You look troubled, Mau de Ferro," Astrid said softly, using the name whispered among the warriors, Iron Hand. Her voice carried a warmth rare for these harsh mornings, an understanding born of shared battles and unspoken fears. Freya forced a tight smile, but it failed to reach her eyes. "It's nothing," she replied, voice low and firm. "Just dreams that haunt me." Astrid's gaze sharpened, sensing the unspoken weight behind the words. "Dreams of the Skald?" Freya's breath caught, the mention of Leif Ottersson's name stirring a tempest beneath her calm exterior. "You should be careful with your words," she warned, her tone edged with quiet desperation. "If anyone hears, it could ruin everything." "But you can't hide it," Astrid countered, stepping closer. "Bjorn's noticed. Even he—" Freya cut her off with a sharp gesture, eyes flashing fiercely. "I am no fool. I know what's at stake." Still, the truth lingered between them like a fragile thread. One wrong word, one careless glance, and the fragile balance of duty and desire could shatter completely. Leif Ottersson had arrived 2 winters ago, a Skald from lands far to the south. His appearance was unlike any other in Ravenshield. Dark hair curling against sun-kissed skin, eyes that held stories of distant seas and forgotten places. He wore his knowledge as proudly as his worn traveling cloak, carrying scrolls and quills tucked into his leather pouch. His voice, rich and measured, carried the weight of countless tales, weaving history and myth with a skill that captured the hearts of his audience. To Gunnar Thorvaldsson, their jarl and leader, Leif was invaluable, a wellspring of information about foreign clans, trade routes, and whispered alliances. To the common folk, he was both an enigma and a source of comfort, a bearer of stories that filled the long winter nights with warmth and wonder. To Freya, however, he was something else entirely, a forbidden flame flickering in the darkness of her carefully guarded world. Their meetings were fleeting and shrouded in secrecy, a stolen moment beneath the ancient trees, voices hushed beneath the veil of night. Freya's heart betrayed her stoic exterior whenever she caught sight of him, a sudden tightness in her chest, a longing she dared not name aloud. Yet she knew the cost of such feelings. A Shieldmaiden's honor was forged in battle and discipline. Weakness, especially one born of love, was a danger she could not afford. As the morning light grew stronger, the village thrummed with the energy of preparation. The scent of pine smoke mingled with the sharp tang of steel as weapons were oiled and sharpened. The clatter of shields being strapped to arms echoed through the clearing. The heavy scent of fur and leather mingled with the earthy aroma of frozen earth and pine needles. Freya's thoughts drifted to the evening ahead, the gathering at the great hall where Leif would recite new poems, as was his custom each moon's change. The hall was a vast wooden structure, its walls adorned with carvings of ancient gods and legendary battles. The flickering glow of torchlight would cast long shadows across the faces of those gathered, their eyes hungry for stories that stirred courage and hope. She recalled the way Leif's voice could fill the hall, soft yet commanding, weaving words that carried both beauty and pain. Yet tonight a storm brewed beneath the surface, an unrest she could not shake. Before she could dwell further, the sharp cry of a horn shattered the morning calm. The sound rolled over the village, a low, mournful blast that sent a ripple of unease through the air. Warriors paused, heads turning toward the source of the alarm, muscles tensing in readiness. Jarl Gunnar Thorvaldsson stood atop the wooden platform near the main gate, his presence commanding attention. His fiery hair caught the light of the rising sun, strands of gray marking the passage of countless harsh seasons. His eyes, sharp and green, surveyed the crowd with the weight of leadership etched into every line of his face. "We have received word from the north," he announced, his voice steady but grim. "The Frost Axe clan marches toward us. They will be here within 2 days." A murmur of apprehension spread through the gathered warriors and villagers. The Frost Axe were fierce and brutal, a name whispered with equal parts fear and hatred. Their last raid, 5 winters past, had left scars both physical and spiritual on Ravenshield, wounds still raw in memory. "Prepare yourselves," Gunnar commanded. "Strengthen the walls, send scouts. This battle will test us all." Freya's heart tightened as she absorbed the weight of the news. The frost on her breath seemed to deepen, the cold pressing closer. Her eyes darted across the village, seeking out familiar faces. Bjorn, already gathering weapons. Astrid, moving with purposeful energy. Leif, watching from afar, unreadable. For a moment their eyes met. A flicker of something passed between them. Hope, fear, longing. Freya looked away swiftly, the ache of secrecy settling like a stone in her chest. The day stretched ahead, filled with relentless preparation. Freya moved through the village like a shadow, her mind a storm of tension and unspoken words. She checked the bows and arrows, inspected the palisades, and drilled with the other warriors until her muscles burned and her breath came ragged. But beneath the warriors' focus, a quiet dread persisted. The coming storm of steel and blood loomed, threatening not only their lives, but the fragile thread of love and loyalty that wove through Freya's heart. As twilight approached, the village settled into a tense silence, broken only by the crackling of fires and the murmur of whispered prayers to Odin and Freya. Freya stood outside the great hall, the scent of pine and smoke blending with the cold night air. She heard the murmur of voices inside, anticipation for the Skald's recital. Yet beneath the surface, the weight of what might be revealed pressed heavily upon her. The poem Leif had promised to share, a ballad of forbidden love and courage. A truth once hidden, now poised to step into the light. Her fingers tightened around the hilt of her sword, the leather worn smooth beneath her grip. The scar on her cheek burned with the memory of battles past and the uncertain future ahead. In that moment, Freya Haraldsdóttir stood at the crossroads of duty and desire, of honor and heart, and for the first time in many winters she wondered if the two could truly coexist. The night deepened, shadows lengthening as the first voices rose in song and story. Outside, the cold wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of change. The first light of dawn had barely settled over the snow-blanketed village when Freya Haraldsdóttir felt the weight of unease press deeper against her chest. The previous hours had been a relentless blur of preparation, sharpening blades, reinforcing palisades, drilling formations. But now, as she patrolled the perimeter alone, the cold morning air seemed heavier, thick with an unspoken warning. Her breath came in steady puffs, misting in the frigid air. As she moved along the edge of the forest, her steps muffled by the crisp blanket of snow. The towering pines, their branches bowed under winter's grasp, formed a dense wall of shadow and silence beyond the palisade. It was a place she often sought for solitude, a place where the roar of battle and the clamor of the village faded into whispers carried by the wind. But today, the forest seemed different, watchful, almost alive with a quiet tension. Freya's hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of her sword beneath her cloak. Her piercing ice-blue eyes scanned the dim undergrowth, alert to the slightest movement. Every instinct honed through years of survival told her to be wary. A faint sound, barely audible over the wind's mournful sigh, caught her attention. A soft, uneven breathing, ragged and shallow. Freya froze, heart quickening. The noise came from beside a fallen oak, half buried in snow and ice. She moved cautiously, her boots crunching softly as she knelt, brushing the snow aside. There, curled in a trembling heap, was a child no older than 10 winters. Her thin frame was wrapped in tattered furs that had seen better seasons, stained with dirt and dried blood. Her face, pale and smudged, was streaked with tears and grime. A deep bruise marred her temple, dark and swollen, and her lips quivered as she struggled to catch her breath.
Freya's heart tightened, a surge of protective instinct rising despite the cold calculation that usually ruled her mind. She reached out a gloved hand, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from the child's face. "Who are you?" she asked softly, voice low but steady against the biting wind. The child's eyes flickered open, wide, fearful, and wild with confusion. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak croak, a plea lost in the icy air. Freya recognized the look, desperation coated with the raw edges of terror. Something dark lingered in those eyes, a story not yet told. "Where are your kin?" Freya pressed, scanning the tree line as if expecting enemies to emerge at any moment. The child's gaze darted around, avoiding direct contact, as if haunted by shadows invisible to Freya. Then, with a shuddering breath, she whispered a single word: "Frostaxe." The name hit Freya like a blow. The rival clan's cruelty was known across the northern lands, raiders who left nothing but ruin and grief in their wake. To find a child, vulnerable and abandoned, connected to that clan was a dangerous revelation. The stakes of her choice became painfully clear. To help was to risk betrayal, suspicion, and perhaps death. To leave her to the merciless cold and whatever fate awaited beyond was to betray the very humanity she struggled to hold on to. The wind picked up, chilling the exposed skin beneath Freya's gauntlets. She glanced back toward the village, its sturdy walls a fragile barrier against the storm gathering on the horizon. The sounds of activity had resumed, voices raised in hurried talks, the clang of hammers on wood. But here, on the edge of the world, the silence pressed in. Freya's mind raced. She was a Shieldmaiden, a warrior sworn to protect her people and uphold honor. Yet the code she lived by did not blind her to mercy. She thought of her own scars, the battles fought not just with sword, but with the heart. How many times had she faced impossible choices? How many lives balanced on the edge of a blade? Her gaze returned to the child, shivering beneath the weight of fear and abandonment. A slow fire kindled inside her chest, a stubborn refusal to turn away, to ignore the fragile spark of life trembling before her. She reached into the pouch at her waist, pulling a strip of cloth soaked in herbs and wrapped tightly, a remedy for wounds. Kneeling beside the girl, Freya worked quickly but with care, pressing the cloth to the bruise with practiced hands. The child flinched but did not resist. "Stay with me," Freya said softly, voice a lifeline in the wilderness. "You are safe now." For a long moment the child's eyes searched hers, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Trust, fragile but precious, beginning to bloom in the cold soil of fear. Freya knew this choice would mark her. To bring the child back to Ravenshield was to invite questions, suspicion, perhaps even scorn. How would the others react? Would they see this child as a threat, a spy, or worse? Yet, as she lifted the trembling girl into her arms, wrapping her in a spare cloak, Freya felt an unfamiliar resolve settle over her. This was no longer just a battle of swords or shields. It was a battle for compassion, for mercy, amidst the unforgiving world they inhabited. She began the slow trek back toward the village, each step heavy yet certain, carrying not only the child, but the fragile hope that even in times of war and shadow, the heart could find a way to hold on to light. As the morning sun finally broke through the gray clouds, casting pale gold over the snow, Freya's thoughts drifted to the coming days. The frost-axe were near, their threat looming like a gathering storm. Yet here, in her arms, was a reminder of what was at stake. Not just territory or honor, but the fragile threads of life and humanity that bound them all. The weight of duty pressed down, but so did the weight of choice. And in that moment, Freya Haraldsdóttir embraced the uncertain path ahead. One forged not just in battle, but in the courage to protect the innocent, even when it meant risking everything she held dear. Freya moved cautiously through the snow-covered clearing, each step muffled by the soft blanket of white beneath her boots. The child rested against her chest, fragile and trembling, wrapped tightly in the spare cloak she had brought for warmth. The village of Ravenshield lay not far ahead, its wooden palisades standing like silent guardians against the endless forest and the encroaching threat of the frost-axe. The cold bit deeper now, a sharp reminder that the northern winter was unforgiving. Freya's breath came out in white plumes, mingling with the faint, ragged breaths of the child. She could feel the tiny body pressed against her own, the uneven rhythm of frightened heartbeats echoing beneath her armor. As they neared the edge of the village, Freya's thoughts churned. The child's presence here was a dangerous secret, one that might rip apart the fragile walls of trust she had built among her people. Yet, despite everything, the instinct to protect was overwhelming. This small life, so vulnerable and lost, deserved sanctuary, if only for a while. The wooden gate creaked softly as Freya pushed it open, careful to avoid drawing attention. The village was alive with the muted sounds of daily life, voices murmuring in hushed tones, the scrape of wood on stone, the occasional bark of a dog. But beneath it all lay the tension of war, a silent shadow that hung over the settlement like a thick fog. Inside the walls, Freya guided the child toward her own cabin, a modest structure near the heart of the village. The sturdy logs, darkened by years of smoke and weather, promised shelter from the biting wind.
She moved quickly, but with a tenderness that belied her hardened exterior. Once inside, the warmth of the hearth embraced them, a flickering glow that chased away the cold shadows. Freya set the child gently upon a worn fur mat, her hands steady as she removed the wet cloak and wrapped the smaller figure in a dry blanket. The child's eyes fluttered open, large and dark, reflecting the dancing flames with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Freya knelt beside her, studying the child's face closely, the faint bruises, the smudges of dirt, and a thin scar that marred the delicate skin near the temple. There was something in those eyes, a guarded wariness that spoke of hardships beyond her years. The child's lips parted slightly, but no words came, only a low whimper that barely disturbed the quiet. For a long moment, Freya simply held the child's gaze, searching for any sign of trust beneath the layers of fear. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken questions and fragile hopes. Slowly, Freya reached into a small leather pouch hanging from her belt, pulling out a handful of dried berries and a small piece of hard bread. She broke the bread into smaller pieces, offering them with a gentle smile that was rare and fleeting. The child hesitated, but finally accepted, nibbling cautiously, the faintest hint of hunger breaking through the veil of shock. Freya watched as the fragile fingers curled around the food, the act of eating a small victory in this cold, uncertain world. As the child ate, Freya's eyes wandered to a small pendant hanging on a thin leather strap around the child's neck. A carved wooden rune, worn smooth by time and touch. It was unfamiliar, different from the symbols common in Ravenshield, yet it carried a quiet weight, a marker of identity, and perhaps heritage. The child's gaze shifted briefly to Freya's own wrist, where the silver bracelet glinted softly in the firelight. There was a flicker of recognition, or was it surprise, before the eyes dropped again, retreating behind a veil of caution. Freya's voice, when she spoke, was low and soothing, careful not to overwhelm. "You are safe here," she said. "No one will harm you." The child's lips moved, forming a single word, halting and foreign in the rough northern tongue. "Skadi," she whispered, the sound fragile but clear. Freya's brow furrowed at the strange name. It sounded like one of the ancient names her mother had once told her in stories, names woven with power and mystery. But the child said nothing more, retreating into silence once again. Understanding that words might come too soon, Freya reached for a small bowl of warm water, cloth, and herbs she kept for treating wounds. Gently, with practiced hands, she began to cleanse the bruised area near the temple, careful to avoid causing pain. The child flinched at first, the sting of the cold water on wounded skin, but bit down on trembling lips and remained still, as if the act of care was both strange and welcome.
Freya's touch was firm but tender, each movement deliberate, a silent promise that here, beneath the rough exterior, was someone who could be trusted. As she worked, Freya's thoughts drifted to the stories she had heard of the Frost Axe, relentless warriors known for their brutality, leaving no survivors in their wake. To find a child from that clan hiding on her land was unexpected and dangerous. She wondered what fate had driven this little one away from home, what horrors had forced her into the cold wilderness. The child's dark eyes met hers again, searching, questioning. For the first time, a faint glimmer of vulnerability softened the wary expression. Freya reached out, cupping the child's cheek with a rough hand, and in that small, intimate gesture, a fragile bond began to form. No words were spoken, but the silence spoke volumes, an unspoken promise of protection and understanding amid the harshness of their world. Outside, the wind howled softly against the walls, but inside the cabin, the fire's warmth wrapped them both in a fragile cocoon of safety.
The shadows flickered across their faces as the night deepened, and for a moment the chaos of the world beyond faded into the background. Freya sat beside the child, sharing the quiet warmth, each lost in their own thoughts, yet bound together by the fragile thread of trust. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Freya's shoulders. She was no stranger to sacrifice, to the burdens of leadership and the harsh judgment of her kin. Yet this was different. This was a test of her heart, a challenge to the warrior's code she had lived by for so long. She wondered how long the child could remain hidden, how long the fragile peace could last before suspicion and fear threatened to unravel everything. But for now, in the flickering firelight, there was only this moment, a rare and precious stillness in a world shaped by conflict and loss. Freya's fingers traced the outline of the rune pendant again, curiosity mingling with quiet resolve. Whatever the child's past, whatever shadows clung to her, Freya knew this was a turning point, a chance to forge a new path, one where mercy and strength might coexist. Outside, the first stars began to pierce the dark northern sky, cold and distant yet steadfast. Inside the cabin, two souls shared warmth and silence, each finding in the other a fragile refuge from the storm to come. The hours slipped by unnoticed as Freya kept watch, her eyes never leaving the child's pale face. When sleep finally claimed the little one, it was hesitant and fitful, but it came, a small victory in a world too often ruled by fear and pain. Freya allowed herself a moment to breathe, her heart heavy, yet lighter than it had been in many moons. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with peril and sacrifice, but in this quiet hour, beneath the watchful eyes of the gods, there was hope. The Shieldmaiden rose slowly, moving to the small hearth to stoke the dying flames.
The fire crackled and sparked, sending warm shadows dancing across the rough-hewn walls. Freya's gaze lingered on the child, sleeping soundly now, and a rare softness touched her features. She thought of Leif, the Skald whose words had stirred something deep within her. A reminder that even in the darkest times, stories could heal, inspire, and change the course of fate. For now, Freya Haraldsdóttir would hold this secret close, guarding the fragile light kindled between them. Tomorrow, the world would demand its reckoning. But tonight, she would be a shield not only for her people, but for this lost, frightened child who had found sanctuary in the heart of Ravenshield. The cold wind moaned outside, carrying with it the distant echoes of a world on the brink of war. Inside the cabin, the silence was broken only by the steady rhythm of breaths and the soft crackle of fire. A fragile peace in a land shaped by steel and blood. The chill of dawn barely softened when murmurs began to ripple through Ravenshield like a creeping frost. The stolen secret, the child from the frost axe, was no longer confined to whispered shadows within the walls of Freya Haraldsdóttir's cabin. In a world ruled by honor and suspicion, such a revelation was more volatile than the sharpest blade. It had started with the hushed voices of hunters returning from the outer forests, their wary glances betraying unease. They spoke of tracks in the snow, small, hurried footprints leading toward Ravenshield's borders, worn and unfamiliar. Soon, those whispers reached the ears of the Jarl's council, stirring unease and setting tongues loose among the villagers. Freya felt the weight of glances turning her way, curious, questioning, heavy with judgment. Though she moved with the same measured confidence, the air around her seemed thinner, the cold sharper. The child she protected, fragile and silent, had become a beacon for suspicion, a dangerous secret that threatened to fracture the hard-won trust within the settlement. One afternoon, a gathering was called in the great hall.
The wooden walls carved with stories of gods and heroes now echoed with a tension that thickened the air. The flickering torches threw long shadows across faces etched with worry and suspicion. Jarl Gunnar Thorvaldsson stood at the center, his imposing figure a bastion of authority. His eyes, usually sharp and assessing, flickered with something akin to wariness. The murmurs hushed as he raised a hand, commanding silence. "The news reaches us," Gunnar began, voice steady but heavy, "that a child of the Frostax clan walks among us." A ripple of shock and disbelief stirred the crowd. Faces turned sharply toward Freya, who stood near the edge of the room, her posture unyielding, yet her heart pounded beneath the steel of her armor. "Why was this secret kept hidden?" a voice challenged. From Bjorn Sigurdsson, his grizzled features dark with suspicion. Freya met his gaze unflinching. "Because she is a child, innocent of the sins of her clan." Bjorn's jaw tightened. "Innocent? The Frostax are killers, raiders. How can we trust that she is not a spy, sent to weaken us from within?" Astrid Ragnardóttir stepped forward, her fiery hair catching the torchlight, eyes blazing with conviction. "We are warriors, yes, but ruthless suspicion will only turn us against ourselves. Freya has fought beside us for years. If she trusts this child, so shall I." Her words stirred a brief swell of murmurs, some approving, others skeptical. Jarl Gunnar raised his hand once more. "We understand the danger," he said solemnly, "but this is not a matter to take lightly. The Frostax are relentless. To harbor their kin is to risk all." Freya's chest tightened. Every word carved at the fragile shield she had built around the child and around herself. The choice to protect was no longer hers alone. It was now a trial before the eyes of all. Later, beneath the shadowed eaves of the longhouse, Freya found herself alone with the child, whom they had come to call Skadi, after the ancient goddess of winter and the hunt. The name felt both fitting and fragile, like the girl herself. Skadi's dark eyes looked up at her, wide and uncertain. The child had grown quieter in the days since the council, retreating into herself as if sensing the storm gathering beyond the cabin walls. Freya knelt, brushing a stray lock of tangled hair from Skadi's face. "The others question you," she said softly, "but I will not turn my back." The child's lips parted, trembling. "I want to stay." Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but in that moment the fragile spark of hope flickered brighter. Outside, the wind howled through the village, carrying with it the distant threat of the Frostax's approach. Rumors spread that scouts from the rival clan had been spotted near the borders, their dark banners like storm clouds on the horizon. Freya's nights grew restless. The weight of her secret pressed down relentlessly, mingling with the dread of an impending attack. Each time she closed her eyes, visions of fire and blood haunted her, the village reduced to ash, and the fragile life she protected crushed beneath the fury of war. One evening, as the sky blood crimson with the setting sun, a sharp rap echoed on her cabin door. Heart tightening, Freya rose to answer, hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Outside stood Eric, one of the Jarl's trusted scouts, a broad-shouldered man whose loyalty to Ravenshield was matched only by his fierce suspicion of anything foreign. "Freya," he said, voice low but firm, "we must talk." She nodded silently, motioning him inside. The firelight cast flickering shadows across his grim face. "Word travels fast," Eric began, "and there are those who believe this child is a threat. Some say you have disobeyed the Jarl's command." Freya's jaw clenched. "The Jarl has not commanded me to turn her away." "Not yet," Eric replied,
but tensions rise.
The council is divided. If the Frostax know we harbor one of their own, they will come with fury. She met his eyes, the cold resolve beneath the surface unyielding. Then we must be ready. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft whimper. Skadi, who had been resting on the fur-covered bench, looked toward the door, her small body trembling. Freya swept her cloak around the child protectively. "No harm will come to you," she whispered, more to herself than to Skadi. As the days passed, the village's unease deepened. Strangers arrived under the guise of traders and hunters, men and women whose watchful eyes and veiled words hinted at hidden agendas. Freya's movements were shadowed by suspicion, every encounter a test of her loyalty and resolve. The old bonds of kinship and trust strained against the weight of fear. Friends cast wary eyes, and allies whispered doubts behind closed doors. The once unified village began to fracture, torn between the need for security and the call of compassion. One bleak morning, as snow fell in heavy flurries, a messenger arrived from the neighboring clan of Black Wolf, a clan that had long maintained a wary alliance with Ravenshield. The message was brief but chilling. The Frostax were mobilizing, and their scouts had reported the presence of a child from their blood hiding within Ravenshield's walls. The letter also carried an unspoken threat, a reminder that harboring enemies, even children, could provoke devastating consequences. Jarl Gunnar called for an emergency meeting. The great hall filled quickly, its wooden walls seeming to close in under the weight of fear and uncertainty. "Tell me, Freya," Gunnar's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. "Why should we risk our people for one child, one who carries the blood of those who have tried to destroy us?" Freya stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "Because she is not their enemy. Because she is more than the clan she was born into." The hall erupted in murmurs, some angry, others doubtful. Bjorn's voice rang out again, harsher than before. "And if she betrays us, if she brings death into our homes from within?" Astrid rose beside Freya, fierce and unwavering. "Then we fight, but we will not sacrifice our honor or our humanity out of fear." The Jarl's gaze flickered between them, torn between the old laws of vengeance and the fragile hope of mercy. He finally spoke, voice heavy but resolute. "Very well. We will protect the child. But know this. Any threat to our people will be met with swift and ruthless justice. Our walls must stand strong, and our hearts harder still." Relief mingled with tension in Freya's chest. The choice was made, but the path ahead was perilous. That night, as the village settled beneath a blanket of snow, Freya found herself alone at the palisade's edge. The wind bit deep, and the stars above were cold and distant. She held Skadi close, feeling the fragile rise and fall of the child's breath against her armor. The weight of countless eyes, judgment and fear pressed down upon her, but beneath it all burned a fierce determination. She would protect this fragile life, no matter the cost. For in a world carved by steel and blood, where loyalty was tested in the crucible of battle, Freya Haraldsdóttir had learned that sometimes the greatest courage was not in the clash of swords, but in the choice to open one's heart against the gathering storm. Smoke and ash choked the chill air as the sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks surrounding Ravenshield. The village, scarred and weary from battle, stood on the knife's edge of survival. Flames licked hungrily at the edges of shattered cabins, and the scent of burning timber mixed with the acrid tang of sweat and blood. The night had fallen heavy and foreboding, casting long shadows that twisted across the frozen ground like specters of despair.
Freya Haraldsdóttir stood rigid near the shattered gate, her breath shallow and clouding the icy air. Her armor, once gleaming, was battered and smeared with grime and dried blood. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the dying light briefly, a fragile glint against the encroaching darkness. Beneath the weight of her fatigue, a surge of unease knotted in her stomach. The events of the day had pushed her to the brink. Now she faced a different kind of torment, the judgment of her own people. The great hall, carved from ancient timber and adorned with the symbols of their ancestors, was filled to bursting. The long benches creaked beneath the weight of anxious warriors, elders, and villagers alike. Faces lined with soot and worry turned toward the raised platform where Jarl Gunnar Thorvaldsson sat with a stern expression, his green eyes like piercing shards of ice. Beside him stood Freya, her stance tense as whispers rippled through the crowd. The child, Skavi, sat huddled at Freya's feet, wrapped in a crude cloak, eyes wide and unblinking. The fragile life she bore the burden of protecting was exposed, vulnerable beneath the weight of suspicion and fear. The murmurs swelled, voices rising in a crescendo of accusation and doubt. Bjorn Sigurdsson stepped forward, his broad frame towering as he pointed a finger at Freya. "How long have you hidden this treachery?" His voice was rough, edged with betrayal. "A child of Frostax in our midst. Do you not see what danger you bring upon us all? Our homes burned, our kin slain, because of your blind mercy." A ripple of agreement surged through the hall. Faces twisted with anger and fear. Eyes that once held respect now narrowed with suspicion. Freya's jaw clenched, every muscle coiled like a drawn bowstring. Yet she did not retreat. Her voice, when it came, was steady, though laced with the weight of weariness. "This child is no enemy," she declared, gaze sweeping the room. "She carries none of their hatred.
It is fear that blinds us, fear that feeds the fire of destruction. I have fought beside you for years. You know my heart." Murmurs of dissent answered her, but Astrid's fierce voice cut through the din like a blade. "We judge not by blood alone. Freya has proven her loyalty time and again. If we cast aside our humanity now, what are we but shadows of the monsters we fight?" The Jarl raised a hand, demanding silence. His voice, weary yet resolute, filled the hall. "The Frostax are not our only enemy. Fear corrodes the strongest of bonds. We stand at a crossroads." His gaze landed heavily on Freya. "You have brought this upon us. Now you must answer for your choices." Whispers turned to harsh accusations, and the weight of the moment pressed down like a winter storm. Freya's heart hammered, not with fear of the battle yet to come, but with the crushing burden of betrayal by those she called kin. Suddenly, the great hall doors burst open with a violent crash, silencing the room. All eyes turned as a figure strode in, commanding attention with an aura of ruthless authority. Ivar Olafsson, the Cruel, leader of the Frostax, stood framed by the flickering torchlight. His pale, scarred face was twisted in a cold sneer, eyes like shards of ice that pierced the soul. "I have come for what is mine," his voice rang out, sharp and merciless. "The child you shelter is a debt unpaid, a poison festering within your walls." The hall recoiled at his presence, a collective breath frozen in time. Jarl Gunnar's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword. "Ivar," he said, voice low and heavy with history, "this is not your battle to claim. You threaten my people, my home." Ivar laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that echoed like a death knell.
Your home is a lie. This child is the key to ending your defiance, to crushing Ravenshield beneath the frost axe's might. Freya felt the icy grip of dread tighten its hold. This was no mere threat. It was a declaration that the war was far from over, that the fragile peace she had fought so hard to protect was crumbling beneath the weight of ancient hatred. Yet, even as fear clawed at her heart, Freya's resolve hardened. She stepped forward, voice ringing clear and defiant. If you think this child will be your pawn, you are mistaken. She is under my protection, and I swear by Odin's name, none shall harm her as long as I draw breath. Ivar's eyes narrowed, and for a heartbeat the room seemed suspended between fury and silence. Then he spat on the floor near Freya's feet. Then prepare to face the storm, Shieldmaiden. Your loyalty will be your death sentence. The Jarl rose, his presence a bastion of strength. Enough, Gunnar commanded. We will not bow to your threats. Ravenshield stands united. But the gathering tension was a powder keg ready to ignite. Among the villagers, fear had already planted seeds of doubt. The protective walls of trust wavered beneath the strain of relentless siege and suspicion.
As the night deepened, Freya found herself alone once more with Skadi in the cabin. The flickering fire cast long shadows across the rough-hewn walls, the dance of flame and darkness mirroring the turmoil within her soul. The child's small hand found hers, trembling but trusting. Freya's thoughts churned, weighed down by the knowledge that the enemy was not only outside the walls, but festering within. Was this fragile trust strong enough to withstand the coming storm? Her mind drifted to Leif, the Skald, whose words had once promised hope and courage. She wondered if his poems could still weave magic strong enough to bind their fractured people, to remind them that love and loyalty could transcend blood and fear. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed outside. The door groaned as it was pushed open, revealing Jarl Gunnar, his face lined with exhaustion but eyes alight with determination. "We must prepare," he said grimly. "Ivar's arrival changes everything. The frost axe will not rest until they have what they seek." Freya nodded, her grip tightening on Skadi's hand. "Then we fight, not just with sword and shield, but with the strength of our hearts." The long night stretched before them, a crucible where honor, love, and loyalty would be tested against the merciless tide of war. As dawn's pale light crept through the narrow window, a storm gathered beyond the walls. The clash of steel, the cries of battle, and the unyielding will of a Shieldmaiden ready to face the darkness, not just of enemies, but of doubt and despair. In the heart of Ravenshield, beneath the weight of ancient grudges and fragile hopes, Freya Haraldsdóttir stood unbowed, a sentinel guarding not only her people, but the fragile spark of love that had dared to bloom amidst the coldest winter. And as the first blow fell, echoing through the stillness, the story of courage and sacrifice etched itself into the bones of the land, a testament to the unbreakable spirit of those who choose to fight, for honor, for love, and for a future forged in fire and ice. Freya Haraldsdóttir sat quietly near the embers of the great hall's fire, her gaze distant as the flickering flames cast long shadows over the worn wooden walls. The battle had ended, but its echoes lingered. Too many faces lost, too many names carved into the growing silence that settled over Ravenshield. The air was thick with grief, but also with a fragile hope that something new might grow from the ashes. Her shoulder throbbed beneath the coarse bandage, yet the pain was a small price for survival. Around her, the survivors moved with weary steps, their voices low, carrying the weight of what had been endured.
The hall, once a place of stories and feasts, now held a different kind of gathering, one marked by a tentative pause, a moment to reckon with both loss and what lay ahead. Leif Otterson stood nearby, his dark eyes scanning the faces of the clan as he offered what aid he could.
He moved with a quiet purpose, the Skald no longer just a foreign poet, but a figure intertwined with the destiny of Ravenshield. His hands, once only instruments of words and song, now bore the marks of battle, scratches and smudges of blood, evidence of courage beyond verse. Freya watched as he knelt beside a wounded warrior, speaking softly, the familiar cadence of his voice weaving comfort amid the pain. She felt a surge of something she had long buried, gratitude perhaps, but also a fragile tenderness. They had weathered the storm together, their secret now laid bare beneath the gaze of those who once might have shunned them. The hall's murmurs quieted as Jarl Gunnar Thorvaldsson rose, leaning heavily on his improvised crutch. His voice, though rasped by exhaustion, carried the weight of command and something deeper, a call for unity. "Today we have bled as one," he began, his eyes sweeping over the gathering. "Our walls hold, but not without sacrifice. We are scarred, yes, but unbroken. More than that, we are bound, not only by blood spilled in battle, but by the truths we have faced here tonight." His gaze settled on Freya, and for a moment the hall seemed to hold its breath. She met his eyes, steady and unflinching, despite the storm within. The Jarl spoke again, voice softer, yet no less commanding. "I have seen the strength of this Shieldmaiden, not just in her sword arm, but in her heart. And I have seen the courage of this stranger who stood beside us when the darkness fell." He nodded toward Leif. "Love has no place for cowardice or shame. It is a force that can bind even the most unlikely of allies." A ripple of approval stirred among the warriors, a sound that grew into a steady chorus of assent. Astrid's fierce smile illuminated her face as she approached Freya, clasping her arm in a gesture of solidarity. Bjorn, once wary and harsh, now stood with a guarded but genuine respect etched into his features. Freya felt the walls she had built around herself begin to shift. The burden of secrecy, the fear of being diminished, started to ease under the weight of acceptance. The scars on her skin, the visible and invisible, were no longer marks of shame, but badges of resilience. Leif's voice broke through the moment, quiet yet clear. "There is a tale yet to be told," he said, stepping forward, "not just of battle and blood, but of the choices we make when the world demands we choose between duty and desire." He began to recite again, this time a poem born not just of longing, but of truth and reconciliation. His words wove through the hall like a healing balm, reminding all who listened that strength could be found in vulnerability, that honor was not the absence of love, but its companion. As the last verse faded, the silence that followed was not one of judgment, but of understanding. Freya's breath came steady, her heart unclenching for the first time in seasons.
The clan had seen her, truly seen her, and found not weakness but the fierce flame of a warrior willing to risk everything for what she held sacred. Later, as the hall emptied and the fire died to glowing embers, Freya stepped outside into the cold night. The stars above were brilliant, scattered like shards of frozen light across the vast northern sky. The world felt vast and uncertain, yet somehow lighter. Leif joined her, his hand finding hers with a gentle certainty. Neither spoke at first, words seemed too fragile for the moment. Instead, they stood together, two souls who had navigated darkness and found not just survival, but a fragile peace.
"You were brave," Leif said at last, voice low, "not just in battle, but in letting the truth be known." Freya's gaze held his, steady and clear. "It was never just my fight," she replied. "It was ours. And now, maybe we can face whatever comes next, together." The cold air bit at their skin, but the warmth between them was undeniable. In that quiet moment beneath the endless sky, Freya Haraldsdóttir felt the heavy cloak of fear lift, replaced by something she had long thought impossible: hope. The battle was over, but the story was far from finished. In the land of ice and fire, where gods walked among men and the heart's battles were often the fiercest, a Shieldmaiden and a Skald had found a new path, one forged not just by steel, but by courage, love, and the hard-won grace of acceptance. The frost had begun to thaw beneath the first light of dawn, the heavy grip of winter loosening ever so slightly as the sun stretched its pale fingers across the village of Ravenshield. The air held a brittle sharpness, the kind that stings the lungs but also promises warmth to come. The survivors moved through the settlement with a slow, careful rhythm, the scars of battle still raw but healing in the tender light of morning. The village was different now, not just in the broken walls or the smoldering cabins, but in something less tangible. A quiet, uneasy peace settled over the people, as if the very soul of Ravenshield had been tested and found stronger than before. Freya Haraldsdóttir stepped out from her modest cabin, the morning chill biting through the worn leather of her gloves. The weight of her armor had been set aside for now, replaced by a simple woolen cloak that hung heavy from her shoulders. She breathed deeply, the cold air filling her lungs and clearing the fog of restless nights. The village stirred around her, children playing cautiously near the edge of the training grounds, their laughter tentative yet genuine. Warriors inspecting weapons and mending gear by the light of early fires. Women moving quietly between cabins, their faces lined with fatigue but marked by a resolute calm. The scar that ran across Freya's cheek seemed less a wound now than a map of survival, a reminder not only of battles endured, but of the path carved through fear and doubt towards something new.
She carried the memory of the last fight, the chaos that had shattered the night, but it was not what defined her anymore. It was the moments after, the quiet courage in the eyes of her people, the reluctant nods of respect, the unexpected warmth that bloomed between her and life in the aftermath of truth laid bare. From the edge of the village, a figure appeared, tall and sure-footed despite the uneven ground. It was Leif Otterson, the Skald who had once been a stranger and now stood as an inseparable thread woven into Ravenshield's tapestry. His dark eyes met hers across the frozen expanse, and for a moment the noise of the waking village faded into silence. He approached with careful steps, his voice low but steady as he spoke. "The village breathes again," Leif said, his gaze sweeping the horizon where the sky met the forest. "Not just surviving, but healing." Freya nodded, the corners of her lips lifting in a rare, genuine smile. "We have scars, but we still stand. That is what matters." Their hands found each other, calloused, worn, but steady. A silent vow that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. The weight of secrecy was gone, replaced by something far heavier yet far more freeing: honesty. Throughout the village, the aftermath of battle wove itself into the daily rituals. The fallen were mourned with solemn rites, names spoken aloud in the great hall, their stories etched into memory rather than fading into silence. It was a grief shared openly, a collective sorrow that bound the people tighter than any bloodline. Freya watched as families and comrades gathered around fires, their voices low and steady, sharing tales of bravery and loss, weaving the wounds into the fabric of their history. Skadi, the child from Frostax, had become a quiet presence in the village.
No longer hidden in shadows, she moved among the people with tentative steps, her dark eyes flickering with cautious trust. The whispers had not vanished entirely, old fears died slowly, but her innocence and the Shieldmaiden's unwavering protection softened hardened hearts. Children offered shy smiles, and even the most suspicious elders found themselves touched by the child's fragile resilience. One afternoon, Freya stood near the palisade, watching Skadi practice with a small wooden dagger under Astrid's watchful eye. The once fiery redhead had taken on the role of mentor with a fierce tenderness, teaching the child not just how to wield a weapon, but how to stand strong in a world that had shown little kindness. Freya's heart swelled with a fierce pride, not just for the child, but for the village that was beginning to embrace a new kind of strength, forged not solely from steel, but from compassion. Jarl Gunnar Thorvaldsson moved among his people with a quieter dignity than before. His injuries had left him slower, yet his presence remained the steady pulse of Ravenshield.
He had spent hours in the great hall, revising strategies and listening to the voices of those who would rebuild. But beyond the plans for walls and weapons, he spoke often of unity. War tests the flesh, the Jarl told the gathered warriors one morning, but it is the spirit that must be sharpened beyond the sword. His gaze lingered on Freya and Leif, a subtle nod acknowledging their roles in the new chapter. We must learn that strength comes not just from the arm that strikes, but from the hearts that dare to love and forgive. The days stretched into weeks, and slowly the rhythms of life resumed their ancient cadence. Fields were tilled anew, cabins rebuilt with sturdy hands and hopeful hearts. Songs filled the air once more, carried by Leif's voice, whose poems had transformed from whispered secrets into shared legend. His words spoke of the battles fought, not just with weapons, but with the courage to be seen, to be vulnerable, and to heal. One night, beneath the vast canopy of stars, the village gathered in the great hall for a feast unlike any before. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meat and spiced mead, the flickering firelight casting dancing shadows across faces marked by hardship but softened by triumph. Freya stood near the long bench, her gaze steady as she watched the mingling of old warriors and young ones, the blending of tradition and change. Leif took the center of the hall, his voice rising in a poem that wove together the threads of the past and the promise of tomorrow. His words spoke of love found in the harshest winters, of battles that shaped more than flesh, and of the fragile hope that blossoms when fear is faced and conquered. As the last verse faded, the hall erupted not in applause, but in a quiet, reverent hum, a collective recognition of the journey taken and the path yet to come. Later, as the feast waned and the embers glowed low, Freya stepped outside into the crisp night air. The sky was a tapestry of silver light, each star a beacon of resilience. Leif joined her, the cool wind threading through their hair as they stood in companionable silence. "Do you think they will ever truly understand?" Freya asked quietly, her breath mingling with the mist. Leif turned to her, eyes reflecting the endless sky. "Understanding is a journey, not a destination, but we have taken the first steps." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within. The road ahead was uncertain, but no longer lonely. Together they had rewritten the story, not just of a Shieldmaiden and a Skald, but of a people who dared to hope beyond the shadows of war. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the snow in hues of rose and gold, the village of Ravenshield stirred with new life. Children's laughter rang clearer, the forge's fire burned steadier, and the ancient gods seemed to whisper blessings on the wind.
In the heart of the north, where ice met fire and the past met the future, a story of love and courage had taken root, one that would be told for generations, long after the scars had faded and the battles were but echoes on the wind. Freya Haraldsdóttir inhaled the cold, crisp air, her heart lighter than it had been in many winters. The shield still hung at her back, a symbol not just of war, but of protection, of the fragile, enduring strength found in truth. And as the first corvus of morning soared above the village, its black wings cutting through the pale sky, she knew that even in the darkest times, life finds a way to carry on. The legacy of Ravenshield was not written in blood alone, but in the courage to live and love without shame. A tale carved not into stone, but into the hearts of those who dare to stand unyielding, shield raised against the cold winds of fate. The morning air carried a fragile stillness. The village breathed slowly, as if the very land itself were catching its breath after the storm. Freya Haraldsdóttir stood at the edge of the palisade, the remnants of battle etched into every corner of Ravenshield. The trees surrounding the village swayed gently, their frost-coated branches catching the pale light of dawn. The silence was not of peace, but of a quiet reckoning, a moment between what had been and what was yet to come. Her gaze drifted across the snow-covered earth, now marked by the footprints of those who had fought and fallen. The scars left behind were not only on the land, but within the hearts of her people. Each burned cabin, each shattered shield, told a story of sacrifice and endurance. Yet, beneath the weight of loss, a stubborn ember of hope glowed faintly. Freya's hands rested lightly on the worn wood of the gate. The cold seeped through her leather gloves, biting, but it was a welcome reminder of the world's unyielding nature. She drew a slow breath, tasting the crisp air, the scent of pine and ash mingling beneath the wide sky. For all its harshness, this land was home, raw and unforgiving, but hers to defend. Behind her, the village stirred with cautious life. Children, once hidden by fear, now ventured out with tentative steps, their laughter a delicate thread weaving through the morning mist. The warriors tended to their weapons and wounds, the sharp clang of metal on stone, a steady rhythm of renewal. Women moved among the cabins, their voices hushed but resolute, bearing the tasks of rebuilding and nurturing what remained. Freya's thoughts turned inward, tracing the path that had brought her here, from the secret glances shared with Leif to the desperate clash against the frost axe. Their love had been a fragile thing, hidden beneath layers of armor and silence. Yet, in the crucible of war and revelation, it had become a beacon, challenging the rigid boundaries of tradition and fear. Leif approached quietly, his footsteps almost swallowed by the snow.
His eyes, dark and thoughtful, met hers with a tenderness that spoke volumes beyond words. He carried no armor now, only the traveler's cloak and the scars of battle etched into his skin. Yet there was a strength in him that no blade could forge, a strength born of vulnerability and truth. "We stand on the edge of a new day," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of all they had endured. "Not just for the village, but for ourselves." Freya nodded, the familiar name of the Skald feeling less foreign in her heart. "We have shed much," she replied, "but what remains is stronger than before. Not just steel, but the bonds we dared to forge." Between them, the space felt charged with quiet promise, a promise born not of certainty, but of shared courage. Together, they represented something rare, a bridge between worlds, a defiance of the old fears that sought to chain them.
Behind them, the great hall stood battered but unbowed. Its walls had witnessed laughter and tears, songs and silences, victories and losses. Tonight it would hold stories anew, stories not just of battle, but of healing and rebirth. Freya's gaze fell once more on the village, on the faces of those who had stood beside her through fire and shadow. In their eyes she saw not only the pain of what was lost, but the fierce determination to carry on. The Shieldmaiden's burden was heavy, but it was a burden shared, a weight borne not alone, but with those she called kin. Her thoughts drifted to Skadi, the child who had come from the enemy's bloodline, yet found sanctuary within these walls. The girl's quiet resilience was a living testament to the power of mercy amidst the harshest winters. In protecting her, Freya had defended not just a life, but the fragile hope that even the darkest legacies could yield to light. The sun, inching higher, cast long shadows that slowly receded, revealing the broad expanse of the land, a land that held stories waiting to be told. Stories of warriors and poets, of battles fought with sword and soul. Stories where love was not weakness, but the very steel that tempered the spirit. Leif reached for her hand, their fingers entwining like threads woven into a tapestry of fate. Neither spoke, for words felt too fragile to carry the weight of everything between them. Instead, the wind stirred again, carrying with it the faint cries of ravens, messengers of the gods and keepers of memory. Their cawing was neither mournful nor joyous, but a call to remember, to endure, and to embrace the uncertainty of what lay ahead. In that moment, Freya Haraldsdóttir understood the true meaning of strength, not the unyielding hardness of shield and sword, but the courage to stand exposed, to carry the scars visible and invisible, and to love without apology. The road before them was uncertain, winding through shadows and light.
But it was theirs to walk, unhidden, unafraid, with hearts laid bare beneath the vast northern sky. As the village awoke fully to a new dawn, the tale of Ravenshield was far from over. It would be told in whispered legends and roaring firesides, a testament to those who dared to defy the cold with warmth, to forge peace from strife, and to find life where only death seemed certain. And in the quiet space between night and day, between battle and peace, the greatest truth remained. Even in the most frozen winter, the heart finds a way to burn. If you have journeyed with Freya and her people, if their story has stirred something deep within, then stand with us. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and let this tale of love, courage, and truth be a fire that warms the long northern nights ahead. For here, in the land where ice and fire meet, we learn that the fiercest warriors are those who dare to love without fear.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.